Hey guys, welcome back. As promised, today I'll review a digital to digital converter, or DDC for short. It's called Gustard U26 and it's one of the bigger DDCs that I have tried around here, and I believe one of the best sounding as well. It has identical dimensions with their R26, A26 and X26 line of converters, so you can stack them together if you wish. However, it doesn't mean it was made to work only with their own DACs. You can use it with any other DAC out there and the results will be substantial, to say the least. It goes for $999 or euros, and let's try it out with a bunch of DACs. I won't talk too much about its looks and build quality, because if you already watched my R26, X26, Mark III or A26 review, then you know everything that you need to know about this one, because it has absolutely the same dimensions and the same case. The TLDR version is that I'm dealing with quite probably the biggest DDC that I ever had on my table. It seems to be larger compared to Adena Gaia and Musician Theonix, thanks to an overkill power supply implementation that took about 2/3 of its internal space. Everything you see is carved from aluminum with just one single glass sheet on its front panel. It looks sturdy, it does have rounded corners, and it looks like I'm dealing with a serious piece of engineering. The interesting part is that we have an OLED display underneath that glass sheet with a very simple UI. You have the main display on the left that shows its working status and the sample rate, and then we have two touch-sensitive buttons on the right side that lets you select its internal clock or an external clock generator, and the button on the far right lets you select 5 different I2S modes, since, believe it or not, but I2S connection wasn't standardized yet. Having a glance on its back, we have just one single USB Type-B input, together with a 10 MHz clock input, and everything else are digital outputs that link it to your precious DAC. We have both coaxial and BNC connections, AAC, optical, and two I2S connections. One is labeled I2SG, and that is the connection you should use with a Gustard DAC. Everything else should be connected to the other I2S output. One thing to note is that U26 supports all of the available sampler arrays today, yes, including DSD 2048 and also PCMe 32-bit up to 1563 kHz, which makes it very future-proof. Up to this point, I believe I've tested around 12, maybe 14 different DDCs of different manufacturers, having different sizes, different prices. However, this one is quite different compared to anything that I have tested so far, and let's talk about that. Besides having the same 50-watt linear transformer that you can see in their 26 and 30 series of DACs, what follows next is pure genius and can only be described as overkill as far as power supplies go. The squares you see are solid-state rectifier bridges, and then an impressive capacitance of 80,000 microfarads follow, and then an impressive voltage regulation stage. The rounded parts, surrounded by metal heatsinks, are encapsulated transistors, followed by LT1761 ultra-low noise micro power regulators that drop the noise floor significantly. Since a high-performance DDC is all about dropping the noise floor as much as possible, I'm really happy seeing this almost overkill version of a power supply, and I also like the fact that we have a bigger spacing in between the components. So I'm pretty sure that the crosstalk and also electromagnetic interference won't be a problem on this one. The next part that you can see right now is the digital input board that contains a custom Amanero technology USB implementation that is completely isolated from the rest of the circuit by these 5 full bandwidth isolators, and only after that you can see the digital to digital converter circuit. In the usual fashion, we have a custom clock synthesizer made by Gustard, and then an oven controlled crystal oscillator, or OCXO. Now, this is not your regular atomic clock that you can see in plenty of DACs of today. This is much beefier and I suppose much costlier as well. It's actually the same one that you can find in their X30 DACs and also R30 DACs, which is a good sign already. And if you want to further elevate its performance, I believe that sky is the limit, because those 10 MHz clock generators, they can be very, very expensive, starting from, I believe, around 1,000 to tens of thousands of US dollars. Gustard already has those C16 and also C18 clock generators, but those are not really on the same page with U26, and I hope they will release a higher performance clock generator somewhere in the future, having exactly the same dimensions of the U26. I have it by my side for about a month now, but I'm seriously testing it for about 1 week. And instead of testing it with just one single DAC like most hi-fi reviewers are doing nowadays, I decided to try 3 different DACs with this one, not at different price points, but different technologies. So the first one will be a chip-based Delta Sigma oversampling DAC, and that is the Eversolo DAC Z10. The next one will be a super advanced FPGA-based single bit DAC, and that is the AudioByte SuperVox. And the next one is really an overkill R2R ladder DAC, and that is the Rockna reference signature DAC. So I wanted to know how it performs with different technologies at different price points, and that is what I'm going to do today. The best digital output that Gustard U26 offers is I2S via HDMI, and that's exactly what I have used with my DACs. However, contrary to popular beliefs, an HDMI cable can positively or negatively impact the sound of your DAC. So if you want the very best sound, please do not use the stock cable of your PlayStation 5 or of your Switch 2 or the cheapest HDMI cable that you can find online. Please use something better. I won't discuss much about this, but after trying more than 15 cables in 5 years or so, I believe, and to my ears, AudioQuest cable sounded the best to me. And if you want the absolute best, then that would be Dragon 48 by AudioQuest, which is quite expensive, sadly. I won't explain again what a DDC does and how it does it. However, if you want to learn that, please check out my Matrix X SPD3 video and also Musician Phoenix video, where I explain why a DDC can make a substantial difference in a well-thought stereo or hi-fi setup. If you have trained ears and a resolving system, then everything will be clear in the first seconds of use, because sometimes the differences are so substantial that measurements or online validation from users is no longer needed. As mentioned before, I did try a substantial number of DDCs from different manufacturers at different prices, and all of them had an impact on the sound. Some of them had a smaller impact, while others had a bigger impact. And that is really the story of today's unit. If you remember the Eversolo DAC Z10 that I have tried just a few days ago, I believe, that one also has a pretty big crystal oscillator, also encapsulated. It's also atomic. It's a pretty big clock, and I'm pretty sure it's a costly clock as well. And I thought that U26 shouldn't make such a big difference, but oh boy, how wrong I was. To be 100% sure what I'm going to say next, I did all of these tests blindly with the help of my son. And I did that in both a hi-fi setup using both Susvara models, because those are very clean and detailed, and also I redid this test in my stereo setup just to be sure what I'm hearing is actually true. And from all of these 3 DACs that I tried, by far the biggest difference that I've heard was with this Eversolo DAC Z10. First and foremost, what I have experienced first was a match with a capital M blacker background on the DAC Z10. And you know, sometimes you don't realize how much darker the background can get, and when listening just to DAC Z10 via USB with a headphone amplifier with a pair of headphones, I cannot say that this one is dirty or that there is some noise floor going up, or that the background is not so black. But when I start comparing, it's really a night and day difference, and I'm very rarely using this expression, night and day difference, but it's really the case here. You can sense that the music is simply coming up, it's oozing from like a black canvas and is going towards you. It's a very weird effect because I cannot hear it on the DAC Z10 on its own via the USB connection, but I can hear it clearly via U26. And this much blacker background doesn't influence only good mastered music. I believe is the other way around. I believe that I have a much bigger difference with bad mastered music because suddenly I can listen to music that was unlistenable one moment ago. When noise floor is dropping so much, the immediate effect will be a higher dynamic range, and you can feel that mostly at the frequency extremes in the sub bass and also in the upper treble. So suddenly there is more information in the bass and there is more information in the treble. Even the mid-range seems to get unveiled in the long run, and you can feel that musical notes are somehow detaching from each other, and that completely removes the grain, the muddiness, and also the veil. I probably mentioned some of these words in my other DDC reviews, because the effects are quite similar, but right now here on the U26 I believe that the effects are stronger, and if you want, I believe the most detailed and resolving DDC, that is the U26. I find it clearer sounding than a live micro DDC. I find it clearer and tighter compared to Musician Phoenix and also the FPGA, and it's on another level altogether compared to a Synxer SU6 and also Matrix X SPD3. There is another thing that I want to discuss with you, something that I don't believe I talked about in some other DDC reviews. Some of these DDCs, they tend to inject a sound of their own. So some of them will make the bass thicker, the mid-range thicker, but somehow the whole sound will be less grippy, less tight. Some of them are making the sound a little bit more clinical. So all of them have a different tonality in a way. By comparison, the U26 doesn't seem to have a sound of its own. I can hear a pretty substantial difference in a few key areas, like transient response, how fast the music is sounding, how resolving everything is sounding, noise control, blackness, and also even soundstage and 3D effects. All of that is pretty different, but when it comes to frequency response and tonality, it doesn't seem to change anything in this regard. It just lets your DAC play and be exactly how it is. My DACs didn't change from organic to dry or vice versa, and I didn't hear an extra boost in bass, in mid-range, in treble. All of that actually didn't change at all. I think there is no need to add or subtract anything from their tonality. However, if you want to make your music a little bit thicker or smoother, then that's exactly what the FPGA or Musician Phoenix will do, and to a lesser degree that will be a Synxer SU6. The third effect was so apparent, especially with fast-paced music, and that was the transient response and tightness. The sound became somewhat faster and grippier as well, and I believe it's a word of difference with fast electronica or with anything that has to do with a faster pace, rhythm and timing. It's pretty hard quantifying this in numbers or explaining in mere words how much tighter the sound can get, but it's like going from a high performance R2R DAC to a super ultra high performance Delta Sigma DAC that is simply much better when it comes to timing. And the last fourth difference that I've heard with the U26 in place was soundstage, imaging, depth, and 3D effects in general. And it's not just getting a bigger sound, because when the noise floor is going down and when you can hear some additional nuances that you never heard on your system with your DAC, it's like your mind doesn't know where to focus first. So you suddenly start looking everywhere, you are getting sounds from everywhere, and suddenly the sound is not just bigger, but it's also deeper. There are a few notes that are closer to you, there are a few sounds that are more farther away from you, so the sound is definitely getting more 3D, more holographic and deeper as well. I'm not just describing a bigger sound like a bigger bubble of air, but I'm discussing a deeper sound as well, and combined with a tighter grip, the imaging is also seems to be drastically improved. All of this combined, I've got the feeling that I'm not listening to DAC Z10 anymore, but I'm listening to DAC Z20 right now, which is not in development, I believe, right now, but it's like listening to the next generation of your DAC. Moving on to an FPGA-based single beat DAC that AudioByte is refining for over 10 years now, the Supervox. I expected some similar gains in performance like it was the case with the DAC Z10, but that wasn't really the case. So what was, let's say, 40% improvement on the DAC Z10 was now 20% improvement on the Supervox. That is not because the Supervox is less impressive, it's actually the other way around. I believe that its superior clocking system and its superior DAC section is simply, better, and the U26 is not helping so much anymore. The Supervox is a much higher performance DAC in my book, and its clocking system is also superior. While the case size is smaller compared to the DAC Z10, the logic behind that FPGA conversion and also single beat DAC is orders of magnitude more complex on the Supervox. Because everything inside the Supervox is 100% custom developed in-house by AudioByte. Adding the U26, the sound got grippier and marginally more resolving, but the soundstage gains were no longer so substantial. However, I could still pick up that U26 in a blind test, so yes, there was still quite a substantial difference, just not such a big one like it was the case with the DAC Z10. When the testing moved to the Rockner reference signature DAC, I'm sorry, but the blind tests simply failed and I couldn't pick up one over the other. Sometimes I felt that the Rockner was better, sometimes I felt that the U26 was better, but when I didn't do blind test, I was starting to make that comparison just in my office using a headphone amplifier and some very resolving sounding headphones. That was the moment when I realized that yes, there is a very small improvement in tightness, I'd say by around 5%, and also in resolution less than 5%. Yes, there was a difference, but the difference was much smaller. Clearly, the U26 responds very differently. Some DACs will gain some newfound skills that you never thought you'll get in the first place, while others will get smaller or even incremental improvements. While I didn't test it with other DACs, only with these 3 DACs, I'm very confident that it will make a tremendous difference with DACs costing around $3,000 or less, and the differences will be smaller with units that are getting bigger, costlier, having a better clocking system, better power supply. This is where you'll get smaller and smaller improvements. However, what is clear to me is that U26 cannot make the sound worse. If that really wasn't the case with a 27,000 euro DAC, then that won't be the case with something more affordable. It's a stupidly simple but reliable logic, I believe. While I no longer have any other DDC around me at the moment, I was more impressed by the U26 compared to anything else I have tried on this YouTube channel. It could be a game changer for any Delta Sigma, R2R or single beat DAC that doesn't cost you an arm and a leg. I hope you enjoyed the honesty in my review. Please consider subscribing if you found this video helpful, and I'll see you next week with a bunch of headphone amplifier reviews. Have a nice weekend, everyone.